Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're feeling refreshed after that lunch break. So today's general election reminds us, let me just introduce myself first. So I'm Melanie Flory. I'm a neuroscientist and the founder of MindRio, a neuroscience-based consultancy for business. And my co-author is Dr. Ninela Ivanova, who is an innovation fellow from the Royal College of Art, and she will be joining us a little later. So for those of you who voted today, I think today's election reminds us more than any time in history that we live in a world of constant change. Rapid expansion and access to intelligent technologies means that the shape and the size of our world has changed quite rapidly and quite unrecognizable in some areas. And we describe this, and this is because of things, of concepts that can be seen, the felt effect can be seen, but they are concepts of connectivity, networking, networks, codependence, and power shifts like we've never seen before. We just can't deny that the ripple effect that decisions taken at a local or a national level, like Brexit, can impact on the world beyond that little micro bubble. And so it is in relation to the domains that we all operate in. Some of us are designers here. I'm a scientist. We've seen somebody in political thinking. So in neuroscience, we identify these interconnected, responsive shifts to the environment around us by terms such as plasticity, rewiring, reconnecting, regenerating, reweighting. And now enter the world of design, and the designer, who is able to bring, for the scientist, who is able to bring these processes of connectivity and reweighting and such concepts and theories to life. That is my journey with Dr. Ivanova. By incorporating it into her design thinking, research, inquiry, and design processes. So without further ado, our first model of neuroscience meets design, or design meets neuroscience. In this model, the intersection is quite apparent to see. Branches of neuroscience, such as cognitive neuroscience and systems neuroscience, right up to molecular neuroscience and developmental neuroscience, can provide insights and information for the designer, but it must never determine what the designer does with that. That is the freedom of design. Because today's designer is facing a complex design challenge of designing accessible, easy to engage with, and uncomplicated solutions to some of the world's most complex problems in health, education, economic welfare, urbanization. The list is daunting. In this model of neuroscience intersecting with design or vice versa, it means that the designer can be informed by neuroscience, and the opposite, the vice versa, is also true. And you'll see this in the probe, the emotional intelligence probe that we both co-created, co-developed. So the beginning in both, some of the characteristics and the values of both domains that we have in common is that they're both people-centered, context-driven, experience-oriented, effect-causing, problem-solving, experimenting. And they both encompass cycles of inquiry and prototyping, or cycles of innovation, amongst others. So there's a lot of common areas on which to learn and intersect, because the methodologies we use might be a little bit different. Here you see the figurative depiction of the initiating process of developing an emotional intelligence probe and a cognitive reframe probe. It's simple, it's effective, and it works. The context of any innovation is not any innovation, but the innovations that we're talking about here is people and experience or effect. And as you go through, unlike quantitative scientific inquiry, design research has this wonderful ability to really get into the world of the user. And one of the things that I'm working with Dr. Ivanova over and above this is the quality of empathy, or the practice and application of empathy, both as a cognitive and an emotional aspect of an expert designer. So in terms of people, understanding people, here's where design research really comes into its own. And in terms of the effect and experience that we want people to have or to create, is when both neuroscience and design can meet. So based on this starting point, this is what, in developing the emotional intelligence probe, here's the model we came to. So we use the acronym probes, a bit cheesy, seeing that we're looking at probes, but it actually succinctly tells us the process for developing probes. So first, of course, everybody knows here we need to define the purpose. And then the research design, the research, how are we going to go about developing evidence, as we've seen in some of the projects presented this morning. What research activities, is it field work, is it a survey, all of these things in terms of what is appropriate. To orient means to align or position something relative to, in this case, the purpose. So then you go back to the drawing board as you would to see. This is where the scientist and the designer can cooperate and collaborate, whether you are in sync with your hypothesis, which is the question, or the design remit. Blend. There are two levels of blending when it comes to working and co-creating in this way, intersecting our domains, but also working together as people. Working together as people, blending here means, in our experience, the personal, cognitive, emotional, and behavioral work that we as co-developers, creators, and innovators have had to go through and experience in coming together to build something together. When you have got the P, R, and O aspect of this model, you've thoroughly worked with that, then this stage, which is the beginning of project planning and the first step towards executing design processes, then actually becomes fun, team-based, and truly co-creative in terms of problem solving and sharing ideas, knowledge, creating new knowledge. That has been our experience to date. Essentiate is a very old word, and it's a transitive verb. It means to compose, to bring to life the essence of something. When, as somebody who is not a designer but a scientist, one of the aspects of design which I suppose a scientist is slightly envious about is the ability to not just build something, the ability not just to create something, to design something, but the design itself is a holder of the essence of the intention of that, whatever that is, that material thing or that digital or that piece of software or whatever it is. So neuroscientists, so while designers essentiate through design thinking and processes, they bring to life the essence through their design thinking, their engagement with the user. Neuroscientists essentiate, we bring the essence out by extracting insights and developing models of brain flow or emotional flow or behavioral flow. And this is where it becomes really important for neuroscientists to work with designers or designers to work with neuroscientists when we come to finding solutions for world problems such as education, health, urbanization. Sample, of course, is that place we all want to get to, and sometimes it's frustrating, and we've had ups and downs, because here we can breathe a sigh of relief. The first testing of what we're about can begin. I'm going to keep my presentation short and actually devote more of it to the question and answer section, because Dr. Ninela can actually be a part of this. But I couldn't help but put in this rogue slide, because I'm not going to say much about this, except that if so far you're not convinced that we need to have an intersection to work collaboratively with neuroscientists, then I'm hoping that the premise that this suggests will bring you over to this side. So the intersection of neuroscience and design can rest firmly just on this premise. Here, this is a sign, the types of sensory neurons that we have. When the neuroscientist and the designer come together, they can make formidable innovation teams, because these specialized sensory receptors perform millions of functions in the body. And you need to know their location, their density in the palm, in the neck, different parts of the body. What is their density? You know, how are they located? If you want to do something where light is going to be an issue, what type of receptors are we working with? You know, when I think about children or education, all of this becomes really important. It's important not just to know all of this stuff scientifically, but for the designer who goes about designing, it's totally relatable, because for them, the things that they deal with, which these receptors are really key to understanding, is how do receptors work with modality, which is materials, the texture, the medium, intensity, less, more intensity, whether it's an online learning program or it's you're building something else, you're designing an MRI scanner, intensity, location in the body where these sensory, so developing your design based on that, and duration. In the emotional intelligence probe, which is a very simple probe, you will see that duration is one of the aspects that we worked on quite deeply. So this has immense implications for digital and materials-based innovations, and in our case, the emotional intelligence probe. So let me just move on to this one, and we'll come back to the neurons in a minute. When I met Ninela in 2014, she had chosen the everyday T-shirt as a relatable garment across all demographics. I'm sure many of us here are wearing a T-shirt, to explore participant engagement and response to novel materials and sensory experience. The novel material was considering fungi-based textiles as an emerging proposition for sustainable fabrics. And so Ivanova's research inquiry focused on two things: public response to novelty of fungi-based textiles. And the second aspect she was questioning, she was exploring negative assumptions that the general public might have, or resistance that they might have, due to the association of fungi-based materials being moldy. Her moldy T-shirt probe, which you can ask her questions about, served well to address these questions in her research. So from those beginnings, when we met in 2014, I had seen how versatile the idea, the notion of a T-shirt was. And at the time, I was involved in a project of emotional intelligence, educating, coaching, developing a global awareness of the importance of emotional intelligence, and to differentiate it from a lot of the public, non-scientific, non-evidence-based information out there on emotional intelligence, and just everyday conversations in which those two words are bandied about, but it's actually an intelligence through coordinated neural activity in the brain. And so using this versatile T-shirt, we built a template of a cardboard T-shirt. in which we got people to, and we've done many trials on this, we piloted it, and our most recent was at the Wellcome Trust, in which we were asked to showcase this twice in the last 2 months for the general public. So it's a cardboard T-shirt, and what you do is to visualize an emotion. So you visualize an emotion. It doesn't have to be using your visual receptors. It can be your auditory receptors. It can be sensory receptors. You visualize emotion. Sometimes it's a guided meditation or a guided visualization in which we ask you in a very controlled way to, even if you want to overcome a specific emotion that you're struggling with, like anger, so to creatively imagine the new feeling, to evoke the feeling. Like right now, if I ask you to, as you're sitting there, you don't have to close your eyes or anything, but just evoke the feeling of calm. It's entirely possible. And then to express that, and this is where the designer and Ivanova's work actually made an impression on me, influenced me, to then, whether you think you have an artistic bone in your body or not, to express that on the T-shirt with the idea, we create this imaginative scenario with the participants, that the emotional T-shirt they are creating is something that they could wear the emotion. But the duration of the exercise is about 3 to 5 minutes. That is necessary for a specific amount of chemical chemoreceptor hits in order for that to become an emotional memory. Very similar to how somebody with post-traumatic stress would have an emotional memory, because there's been quite a prolonged time in which the trauma was going on. So, having done that, we are now, and having trialed this, we're now at the place where the prototyping continues, because the receptivity of the public to this made us realize that we could use this for developing attention and focus in ADHD children, to develop meditation or mindfulness. So there are ways that we can expand this. The idea is rooted in cognitive neuroscience and inclusive design thinking. But the flips the provoke emotion designed to provoke emotion. Movie makers and marketing people use this. They design to provoke an emotion, but we flipped that concept on its head in terms of up, down, and down, up communication in the brain, so that this is an emotion-inspired design. The probe has been very well received, and our aim is to, this is another cognitive probe in which we use texture to get people to reframe troublesome thoughts, for example, troublesome cognition. So the Swatcher thinking and the EMOT probe, which is a true intersection of design with neuroscience, we are hoping to collate 1 million emotes to demonstrate the emotion first, creative expression, and design, creative expression, design connection, to serve as a global platform for awareness, appreciation, and greater research funding for emotional intelligence at a much younger age for children, and for adults as well, ongoing development. I want to close with, as I did promise that we'd have a larger Q&A session than my presentation, with some of the aspects that neuroscientists can help the design community with. So out of our cognitive affective systems neuroscience research, the company that I have founded, these are some of the aspects we work with, which is futures mindset, which is different from just futures thinking like scenario planning. Storytelling. Now, a lot of the storytelling is for branding, but there is an aspect of storytelling in how your brain itself, receptors, you can appeal to specific receptors in storytelling to create effect. Movie makers know this very well. presence and presentation. These are aspects that we do on a daily basis, on a moment-by-moment basis, except when we think that nobody's watching us. And these are aspects that involve multiple intelligences. This is where, again, neuroscience and design can intersect. And focus forward, which is slightly different from the futures mindset. The futures mindset is about how we want to develop the future. The focus forward is similar to what Fernando was talking about earlier when we talked about preparedness. What are we preparing for? And in that preparedness, it's the mind that we're looking at, and these are aspects of mindset when we focus forward. The preparedness that we are preparing for, that we are focusing forward on, is the internal environment of our being. So that is just a little model of where neuroscience has, not me particularly, but neuroscience has intersected with design, where the last two, the fashion enterprise and fashion tech, neuroscientists are employed a lot in these type of ventures because we talked about receptors and nerve cells and messaging and all of that, and this is where we can actually help designers. So I'm going to leave you with that and ask Dr. Ivanova to join me for any questions you might have.
It's not really a question, just because you mentioned inclusive design. So I'd like to know if you tested or worked with any disabilities. I don't know exactly what I want to know, but related to disability specifically.
Thank you for this question. So for this particular probe, we've tested it with different groups of people. So inclusivity is not only around disability, but we have had people with motor disabilities attend some of the workshops. Now it's completely open to the member of the public to choose what topic they bring to the table. So actually, I don't think that has come up where somebody has chosen to work on a question or an emotion associated with that. But it's a very good point, and I think it's something to explore. Yeah. But we have worked with children, elderly, women, men, across the board, not a mainstream person, because the workshops that we've had are open.
Thanks for your presentation. You spoke a lot about how it's been really successful to collaborate. I wondered if there were any challenges along the way.
Yes, you will find, I mean, the article in which we've written is, the challenges is the methodologies. Ninela will answer this question herself as well. The challenges is the attitudes with which we train are quite different. The scientific attitude, which is all about proofing, evidence, methodological, where although what I discovered is design has the same aspects, but how we define it is different. Of course, design process and thinking and developing and prototyping has a methodology about it. It's just that scientists don't understand that methodology, or vice versa. So there are those challenges, the methodological thinking, methodologies you employ. There's also how we review what is evidence and what is evidence-based. And what can bring you together, in my experience, is when you team up, you intersect around the user or the effect that you're creating. It is actually, it's not about the egos involved. It's not about the trainings that you come from. If you can put it to good use because you want to affect something, then those things you tend to work around them, work through them.
Yeah, thank you, Mel. And just to add to this, A specific challenge we've had has been around language, building on different methods, different training and background. But I think we've carefully taken time to clarify what we mean by terms. I also think it's really interesting to mention that we didn't come together as sometimes we get approached in universities. Oh, I'm writing about this. Shall we do a project together? It was much more natural emerging relationship and partnership and a friendship, really. And so in that, you have a lot of openness to each other as human beings, as people, appreciation for who we are and what we bring to the table. So it doesn't mean that we are coming together all the time. It's, even in writing this article, it's what Melanie brings to the table, which is the scientific knowledge, the rigor of thinking, the understanding context, factors, all of that, and then the translation of value of design to create, to give that a physical form that allows for expression of it and engagement with it. And I think we've explored that over the last 5 years now,
Yes.
in various forms. And yeah, I can't say what a truly amazing partnership that has been.
Thank you. Very interesting work. I'm interested in the creative expressions that people have produced in your workshops. So you said it's been positively received. And when you just showed a little example of all the T-shirts, I saw quite a lot of hearts, which is a cultural convention, isn't it? It's a symbol. It's a representation of love. So in what way do you think that those expressions are actually multimodal or amodal potentially? Do you look at that, what's actually coming out?
No, actually, we haven't looked at it in that way. And neither have we. I mean, there is room for developing in specific situations, specific emotions. But that will need to be contained because there's ethics around that. For example, as a neuroscientist and psychologist, prior to starting my own company, I specialized in war-related post-traumatic stress, so mainly worked with soldiers and defense personnel. I worked in the Ministry of Defense. So if we did something like that, for example, then it would need to be contained, it would need to have ethics, ethical fencing. But to answer your question directly, I would be very happy if somebody wanted to take some of our T-shirts and study that further, to look for various expressions or whether culturally one emotion is expressed more than the other. But where we are going with this is that the research is very clear that specifically 5 emotions in terms of social development, social success, business, career success, clarity, relationships, long-term relationships, there are 5 very specific emotions, and if we could work with that, they're all interactive emotions. They're about intelligence skills, about knowing oneself and actually recognizing signs from other people. So one of them is gratitude. As you know, everybody's funding gratitude in terms of research. Empathy is one, but then how we define empathy is really out there. But based on this, just tailoring workshops to be able to work with that as well is good. But culturally, it would be a very interesting study. Any takers? Yeah.
Thank you.
One last question? No, I've got a question kind of related again to process and the collaboration. Are you mapping this 5-year journey that you've had together as well? Or is it just something that it's part of what you do, but it's not kind of being elevated to the kind of meta layer in terms of collaborative processes?
Okay. For me, actually, it's writing this article that brought to mind the importance of this. And understanding the impact that taking neuroscience out of the lab and into applying it outside in the world has made me realize that perhaps we should do this in a more informed way. So that's where I'm at. Do you want to?
Yeah, I was going to say the same, actually, because the nature of the work and the process has been so natural. We met in a very serendipitous way at a bus stop, not in a research networking event. It's this type of events, posters, the Design and Emotion Conference in Amsterdam 2016, that have actually prompted us to reflect, to write about our work, see how it's involved. I think it's a common feature of design that you don't get enough time to sit and reflect because you're always in action. So actually us sitting down and having the discussions and the conversations.
A lot of laughter.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's been it. But it would be interesting to actually map, perhaps if anyone else is interested in seeing how we interact and how that plays out. Yeah.
Okay, thank you
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.